The scripture this morning is from Genesis 12, verses 1 through 9. Now the Lord said to Abram, your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarah and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages toward the Negev. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his holy word.
Everyone at the party was confused. The guest of honor and another participant had disappeared, and no one knew where they were for a while. And then they found them sitting on the ground playing with rocks. Now let me take a step back, clear up any confusion. This was a 4-year-old birthday party. To be precise, it was a princess party. Everyone had their dresses and their tiaras, except for my son Ben, who had been handed a very gender-appropriate prince's crown. We would not have let Ben miss this party for anything. It was his best friend's 4th birthday. He and his best friend Sarah, who he called Sari, had been together since we moved to Missouri. Sari's parents were members of the church. Her mother stayed at home and watched her and another baby, and so Ben became the other playmate every day while my wife and I went to work. We wouldn't have let him miss the party for anything because we were about to move. Ben and Sarah had no idea this was their last party together. All the people there knew was that there were lots of fancy dresses to have pictures taken in, and a little boy with a crown. Someone had taken a Burger King crown, spray painted it gold, stuck it on his head. His was not clearly as much in need of protecting as the other outfits. Yet all the dresses seemed to stay intact through presents, through cake, even through the ice cream. The danger zone, though, was when they finished and went out to the backyard to the playground set. There were swings, there was a slide, and then under the slide, there was a sandbox that, as you can imagine, got very little attention during the princess party. There were mothers all floating around, hovering, helicoptering, you might say. If I remember correct, a couple of them had tiaras of their own. I was the other man sitting back with Sarah's dad, trying to not be too much in the mix. At some point, though, we heard, "Where's Sarah? Where did Sarah go? We can't find Sarah." And then somebody else goes, "Well, Ben's missing too. Where are they?" It didn't take long. They were under the slide, in the sandbox, plopped down in the sand. Ben in his little shorts, no big deal, and Sarah with her princess dress all spread out. They were sitting in the sand, stacking rocks. One of the moms, I think she was one of the tiara wearers, either out of concern for the shift in social ethics of participation, or out of concern for the fancy dress, says, "What are you all doing?" And Sarah, without even looking up, says, "We're stacking rocks." I'm not sure what the motivation of the parent was as she pressed on, but she asked, "Why?" And Sarah answers, "To remember that God is with us." To remember that God is with us. Sarah had read today's scripture. Tiara Mom had not. Technically, Sarah hadn't read the text. She was 4. But she and Ben had every week been in Worship and Wonder, a children's program during worship that was kind of a Montessori storytelling model. Each week they heard a different story, and one of their favorites that was always told in the desert box of sand was where Abraham and Sarah moved from place to place, and everywhere they went, they stacked 3 little rocks in the story to remind them that God met them there, and that God was already there ahead of them. They knew the story. And so as they saw sand, as they knew this was a significant event in celebrating someone's birth, they took time out to stack rocks to remember God was with them. If you ever wonder why in our tradition children are welcome to table, it's because often they understand God's presence in ways the rest of us have forgotten. They often celebrate spirituality in ways that have become routine to us. Today's story has a lot of moving parts. Abraham and Sarah are moving from one place to another. We get lots of names and places like those where people lived and the people who lived there. We get names of different cultures and locations. And we get a covenant between God and this family. And then a lot more happens in all the chapters of Abraham and Sarah as you go. Abe and Sarah are busy people in the book of Genesis. And along the way, they make some friends, they burn some bridges, and they shed some tears. They dream some big dreams. But when we read the story, we're reminded that one thing they did all along was stack stones. Stacking stones. Now, we get the benefit of chapter and verse, right? We can say today's scripture was from Genesis 12. We'll read verses 1 through 9, and we can go to the book and look that up. But we know this isn't how families tell stories, right? It's not how they reference their memories. We know this isn't how people mark special occasions. You remember on birthday 4, 15 minutes in when da-da-da-da happened? No! That's not how we tell it. Stories in our families, stories in our lives aren't told by chapter and verse. Our journeys are told by stacking stones, building altars to God, significant places, significant times, significant people that stand like stones in our memories and in our family timeline. Think about the Roman practice of having a milestone every mile on their roads as they have built them and improved them, so that you would know how far down the road you were, where the next thing on the journey might be. Abraham and Sarah stacked stones, altars to God, a physical reminder of God's presence in the midst of everything that they were dealing with. They didn't say, remember back in chapter 15 when. They said, remember back in Shechem when we stacked rocks under the big tree and all that happened that year that came. They said, remember back in Bethel when we searched for just the right stones and what that meant to us? About 500 years later, after Abraham and Sarah stacked stones, the Israelites will come out of slavery through the wilderness, cross over the river into the same area And what do as they come through the river? They pick up rocks, and as they get to the far side, they stack them. And someone said, "Why are we stacking stones?" And Joshua tells them at that time, "So when our children ask, why are these stones here, we can tell them of all the things God has done in our history, in our family, in our journey for our people thus far." A milestone in their lives. It's a tradition that clearly goes all the way back to Abraham and Sarah, maybe the grandmothers before them, right? Each place they went, they stacked stones. Now, did they think an altar was necessary to give some sort of sacrifice or offering? We don't know. Was an altar necessary for some ritual of their faith at the time? We don't know. It's not really talked about. There's no detail about the use of the stones other than stacking them as a way of honoring and remembering, celebrating God's presence and standing as a testimony for any who might need reassurance that God is with them. Now, sometimes our sacred spaces are bigger than a stone. Sometimes we talk about the cornerstone of a building as we put it up, right? And we look around, we can see the bricks that help build this building that we sit in today. Sometimes a place becomes sacred because of what happened there. Sometimes a place becomes symbolic of a season in our life. Sometimes a place becomes a memorial to what once was. Grandma's house, our first school, the location of our first date, the place we hung out when, the place we said goodbye. Sometimes our stone is a place. Sometimes it's more of a metaphor. Sometimes our stone is an event. The first time we did something, the first time we met someone, and where we were when the world changed, that moment in time. It's the event where we had to say goodbye. Sometimes our stone is a moment in time, and we revisit it in our hearts and in our memory when we need to be reminded, when we need to honor and celebrate what was and be reminded and assured of what will always be. Abraham and Sarah moved a lot. Some of you have that experience in your life as well. Constant transitions at one point or another, family coming in and out of our lives, locations coming in and out of our lives. Abraham and Sarah had a lot of new places, which means a lot of goodbyes. They had a lot of new beginnings, which means they had a lot of endings. I wonder how their moving process started, and I wonder how it evolved. For any of you who've lived in the same house your entire life and never moved, well, God love you. For those who've been on this journey of goodbyes and hellos, of endings and new beginnings, you know it can be complicated, but after a while you start to figure out how you do it, right? There becomes some routines. Everyone's different, but there's some things that stay the same for you. I wonder how the process for Abraham and Sarah began and how it evolved over time. I wonder if altars became a topic of conversation in advance. Maybe the first time it just happened organically. Maybe they got there and said, "Hey, look at these rocks. Let's stack them up to remember that God is with us. These remind us of rocks back at the old place." But I wonder as they went if it got more polished. I wonder if they had a specific number of stones. I wonder if they had a style or a pattern that they stacked them in. Or did they get creative each time for a new opportunity in a new place? Did they do it alone, or did they invite others to come and help them? Was it a communal practice? After the second or third time, did they stack them themselves or start hiring that out to somebody else? Like when you pay to have somebody stick your Christmas lights up for you. However it started, stacking stones became a tradition. It's kind of like a family on vacation that sees an ornament and says, that would be a great thing to put on our Christmas tree to remind us of this trip, this moment in time. You see just the right one on that vacation, but then every time you go on vacation, you feel like you have to be in search of a Christmas ornament. Almost so much so that the Christmas ornament becomes more important than the vacation and the time you're spending. The people start shopping for the Christmas ornament before they even leave for the vacation. Ironically, some of my family's worst moments have been on vacation. Exhausted parents, children without routines, and exhausted parents. Times in our lives when we were just too much of a mess to be moving around. Too much of a mess to stop and deal with ourselves. Vacations can be unforgiving this way. Stepping outside of our routines and doing something different can be unforgiving to all the baggage we carry. I'm sure Abe and Sarah had their time of these moments too. If you read through Scripture, they faced some messes. They created a few of their own. They also showed amazing hospitality along the way, even in the midst of the mess, grounded in faith that was bigger. Bigger than their problems, bigger than their fears, bigger than the differences between them and the differences between them and others around them. When Sarah dies, it is a friend from another culture, another place they have lived, that gives them a burial cave. Ephron is a Hittite, and Abraham and Sarah are living in a strange land where they don't have family and friends. Abraham offers to buy land from anyone who will offer it to them, that he'll pay them fair price, but he needs a place to bury his beloved. And Ephron, his friend, says, there's a cave on my land you can use, but you cannot buy it. You can have the cave, and you can have the land it sits on too. It's my gift to you, my friend. Abram is eventually buried in the same cave as Sarah, their bodies resting within the stones of the creation around them, a place for their children to come and say goodbye, a place that will be a milestone in their families' lives, and still today is a sacred place, a stone marker for Muslim, Jewish, and Christian pilgrims. I wonder what places hold meaning for you. I wonder what places you revisit when you have a chance to travel or in your memory. What is sacred ground looking like for you these days? What are your stones that you've stacked, and where have you stacked them? Where is your holy ground? What place holds so much hope or so much hurt that you find yourself drawn back to it? I wonder what moments mark time for you. What events help you place other memories in their context? What are the events by which you tell time in your life? I wonder what reminders of God's presence are in those memories. I wonder what reminds you of the strength you possess. Where have you stacked stones, or where conveniently has God stacked them for you in your own story? What helps you see a change as an opportunity rather than a disaster? What helps turn a transition from an experience of loss into a potential for resurrection? I wonder what reminds you of God's presence along the way. The last week My wife and daughter made a carrot cake. It was my dad's favorite. I didn't remember that it was the day we had had his memorial service, but they did. And they didn't have to explain what the cake was for when they made it. I already knew. My mom always told churches that she served and friends that she loved that something has to die for something else to live. She helped close down more ministries, shut down more programs, let people let go of chapters in their life. And she stood over the birth of more programs, new life, new relationships, and new opportunities than I could keep up with. But as I ate carrot cake, I knew I was a month from remembering my mom's stroke. I got a text from her best friend saying, "I'm getting messages from your mom. Help me remember the timeline, because I know she's nudging me in her spirit for something." We texted back and forth about milestone moments, about the timeline of my parents' passing, and I hear mom's voice, something's got to die for something to live. And I have no idea what might grow out of my grief, of the loss of my parents. It's still too early on the journey for me. But I know my mom's wisdom. I know her clever sayings, like, "Something's got to die so something can live," are markers for me. They call me back to the moments that she said it, what was going on in those days, and what wisdom I might draw from it. I don't know what hope will come from it. I don't know what new things still might rise up, but I trust it will come, because I've been blessed with markers along the way to assure me that it happens. We don't need to remember all the places that Abe and Sarah traveled to understand this scripture today. We don't need to know the trade routes they followed or how they packed on their way on the road. We don't need to really even understand the geopolitical context between Abraham and his wealth and the communities they lived in. Those are some fascinating sermons on other topics for another day. For this story, on this day, all we have to think about is the rocks we have stacked, the sacred ground that helps us make sense of the world around us, the people and the places we go back to honor and to celebrate, to remember and be assured. All we need to take from this story is the importance of stacking stones as we ask, how will we remember and celebrate? How will we go about the honoring and the telling our story, telling about God with us, telling a story of God's promise to be with us, all of us? What stones will we stack so that the world may ask us about our story, that we might remember and to proclaim this love to all?